Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Laravel Podcast Season 7. I'm your host, Matt Stauffer, CEO of Titan, and in this season, I'll be joined every episode by a member of the Laravel team. Today, I'm talking to Josh Cirre, DevRel at Laravel. Josh, can you say hi and share a little bit about what you do every day at Laravel?
Yeah. Hey, everyone, and thanks, Matt. My name is Josh Cirre, and I work at Laravel as a DevRel. What that means is I basically get to be involved with the community as much as possible. Currently, what that means is kind of having three different categories of day-to-day life of one, building things. So we just about a month ago just released a kind of AI chat demo tool. And so that's fun to be able to build because a lot of people want to see, okay, how are you building something within Laravel? And it's not necessarily a starter kit, but it's more of like a demo, and being able to have that in public is awesome. Next is any kind of video content. That's where the majority of my day-to-day usually falls, especially around this time, which we can get into later. But then lastly, I do a lot of development still. So this is probably the first job I've ever had where I've actually done development work for my job that wasn't just internal tools. And so I do a lot of marketing stuff, especially when we come to big releases. Like I helped out with the Night Watch page. That's not my sole focus. We do have a DevRel, Leah Thompson, who is solely on kind of marketing development. But I help out with that, and I did the cloud pricing calculator was one of my bigger projects recently.
Okay. When you're building those, what is your tech stack of choice? If you were to be given the more complicated calculator with knobs and widgets and tools, what would you choose today?
Yeah. Well, the current iteration of the calculator was the cloud landing page, and kind of like marketing pages were all built in Blade with Alpine. And so that was a little bit of a constraint where like a lot of the UI features that we were taking from the cloud repo were going to be more like React. Yeah. But building them out in Alpine and Tailwind was fun. I got to learn so much about the intricacies of Alpine just within that one, because it's just one Blade file for that pricing calculator.
Yeah.
With PHP variables at the top and everything like that. I would probably still do that if I was giving that same project, unless it needed to have a little bit more state, like we've talked about, if and when we revamp it, like maybe having users guidelines, maybe be able to pull specific features from their cloud application to say, okay, what would this new application look like within terms of pricing, that kind of thing. That would probably be more React if I was given my choice of stack.
Okay. And that leads perfectly into the next question I have for you. And you know, kind of one of the things that I always ask in the podcast is like, what is the story of what got you to Laravel? And I'm particularly interested, and I want to hear the whole backstory, like what got you here, but I'm particularly interested in your last, I don't know if it was 6 to 12 months where you felt like you kind of like joined the Laravel community and then just was like, well, I don't know if there was a layoff or something, but you're like, I'm just going to start making this content for these Laravel people, whoever they are. And then you just kind of like, and then a little bit later, hey, here you are working at Laravel and all kind of stuff. So I want to hear the whole story, but for you specifically, I really want to make sure that last bit gets some really time and attention. So can you tell us your story of what it kind of brought from where you came from to where you are today?
Yeah, it really is a crazy story, even for my own standards. I feel like I have a lot of stories, and my wife will get bored of them most of the time, where it's like, hey, you know, I have this random story of, I don't know, some guy paying me $200 at a park in Chicago to slap him in the face. You know, there's things like that just
sounds like a good story.
Yeah, just randomly happened to me in a lot of ways. But I would put this, how I fell into the community of Laravel, and then also like working for Laravel as one of the top, I never expected that in a million years kind of thing.
Yeah.
It really starts with my desire for what I wanted to do in development and that world itself, because I, as a little bit of a quick backstory, I had a bunch of different hands in a bunch of different areas growing up, especially like in college, post-college, where I was like, hey, I'm just going to try a bunch of different things and see where they fall. A lot of it came through music, acting, and then really I wanted to be in SNL on Saturday Night Live. And so when I lived in Chicago for about 4 years, I took classes from Second City, which is like this improv school that a lot of the greats, Steve Carell, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, they kind of made their way up through there in Chicago and then kind of like transitioned into Saturday Night Live. So I was like, I'm just going to do that. That was my dream for the longest time. And so on the side, I learned a lot more of tech. I was already kind of dabbling in tech within high school, within college, mostly landing pages, bands that I knew that wanted a WordPress site put up for them kind of thing. I never coded really. It was more of just, I know how to tweak things, look something up, modify it,
Yeah, totally.
And so I didn't really code. I did buy some like C++ coding books and I'd got as far as like Hello World, that kind of thing. Cause I was like, I'm going to be a game developer and build the next Battlefield 2. But that's a whole nother story. And so when I transitioned kind of back into tech, I knew two things. I knew I wanted to not give up my creative side in the sense that I still do enjoy music. I still play music. But I also just like, acting. I like writing. I like that, artistic, cinematic side, if you will. And so I knew that eventually I would get into something like that. And I didn't know if that world collided within tech. And so a lot of the second thing I knew I wanted to do was work remotely because my mind just worked better when I wasn't having to collaborate with people until I needed to collaborate with people. Yeah. And the few office jobs I had were very tough for me as an individual because I didn't feel like I could get the deep work I needed to get done until I was home. And then I would just do extra work.
Yeah.
And so the first couple of jobs that I had were more in the realm of customer support, technical support, where I could learn how to code on the side, even more depth, a lot of internal tooling that we could build, a lot of automations that I could learn that process of building. And then on the side, it was always like, hey, I could figure out how to build a SaaS. I could figure out how to build this tool that I need or if one of my friends has an idea, maybe I can try to figure that out. And so it was a lot of that kind of process, really up until about 2023 was when I got laid off. We had just had our second kid, and I got laid off from the company that I was working at. I know. It's always perfect timing. And I got laid off and I was in the sales engineering space, and along this time I had found that I wanted to be, this new world was coming up in the 2018, 19, 20 of this DevRel role, where it's like, hey, a lot of the people I was following who were writing blogs, who were on Twitter, who were on LinkedIn, were like, they used to be these theater people, just like me, but now they're tech people and theater people who are making videos, going on podcasts, talking on live streams, that kind of thing. I was like, that sounds like the perfect fit. And so every role that I was in up until I got laid off, I kind of like made it an honorary DevRel as best as I could. There was never DevRel in those companies, but I was like, I'm going to spend an extra 6 to 10 hours a week outside of my actual work and just pretend if this was a DevRel role, what would I be doing? So I made videos. I talked about it. I talked about what I was learning, that kind of thing. And when I got laid off, I was like, hey, I don't really know what to do because I don't have the experience to jump into a DevRel role, but I don't want to continue with sales engineering and I don't want to, do a 180 and just go into development because I don't think that would fit really well with me, or I would pretend it was a DevRel role anyways.
Yeah.
And so I did the thing that every smart unemployed person would do, and I spent a bunch of money on making equipment. Spent a bunch of money and time on making a YouTube channel in a lot of ways. I told my wife, I was like, I really think that this is going to, I think I could do this. I think I could, if not make it to a full-time thing, I think it could lead to a full-time thing. And she was very supportive because like I was like spending all day applying to jobs and like doing some kind of contract work. And then at night I would just, pretend I was a full-time YouTuber and the thing that I had kind of learned and picked up was in all of these side projects, and even kind of like even these like internal tools that I was building, I was like, hey, every single night I want to try to learn something. And so I would find the frameworks, the libraries, the programming languages that I didn't know really well. Mm-hmm. And I was just someone who just knew JavaScript. I knew the back end as a service type stuff like Firebase, Supabase. And I dabbled with like MongoDB within Meteor. That was kind of like my one full stack thing that I used. Yep. It's still around, by the way, which is interesting. I haven't touched it, but it's still around. Yeah. And so every night I would try like, okay, if I was to build my next SaaS, what would this look like? And usually I always got stuck on the authentication piece. I don't know why. For me, it was just, I hated doing it, and it took me longer than the actual CRUD piece within everything else. Yeah. And I needed authentication for 99% of the products that I put out. And so one night I was like, I'm just going to do all the old school MVC frameworks that I've been hearing about. And this was probably 2022. And I think it was Laravel 9 at the time. I think Laravel 10 might have just been released. I think it was Laravel 9. And I installed a Laravel app. I installed a Rails app. I installed a Phoenix app. And I installed Blazor app, which is C#.
Yeah.
And I just did the same app, and I timed myself of how long it would take me to learn it and do it. And I hadn't written in any of those languages. And the app that I was building, which is basically a glorified to-do list that was authenticated and, authorized and everything like that. Laravel, it took me just under an hour and a half, and everything else was like close to 4 hours. And I was like, I guess I'm building all my next apps in Laravel. And it was mostly because I was shocked at Breeze at the time, was where I could just install an app and like have my dashboard and everything ready. I didn't have to worry about, I still don't know too much about like how the authentication piece truly worked. It was one of those things where I didn't need to know. I just needed to use it for how I built it. And so when I got laid off, the things that I was kind of building on the side, even like talking to people at my work who were using PHP, but not Laravel. And of course I was just doing internal stuff for them before I got laid off. I just wanted to build projects. And so on the side, before I got laid off, I built a couple SaaS projects in Laravel. It was the first time I actually ever released something that people paid for. Nice. I had built a whole bunch of other tools in JavaScript and everything like that, but never anything people paid for other than some contract work. And so when I got laid off, I was like, when I talked to my wife about making the YouTube channel, I knew that the thing that I really wanted to put out there was kind of why I was so excited about Laravel. Like why me, who I didn't think, and I still don't think to some extent, like I'm not a great developer, but it allowed me to build these projects that I'm making money off of to feed my family while I'm unemployed and doing all of this. Yeah. And so it just started this process of me having insane, like imposter syndrome of here's this new guy. I was watching the Laracons. I was watching the Aaron Francises, the Matt Stauffers, the Jeffrey Ways of the world who have been in this space for 10 plus years. And I was like, I don't want to pretend that I'm just like this expert who's come in and like, oh, now everyone should listen to me. But at the same time, I don't want to pretend that I am not super excited about this. And and to hide all the things that I've already learned just in like past, year and a half. And I don't know, it just kind of went on from there in the sense that every single video that I put out, like I wanted to make sure it was from this point of, I want to tell you what I've learned. It might not be truth. It might not be what people who are building in Laravel for years might not do this the exact same way, but this is how I got here. And this is something you might learn from. And yeah, eventually, I found that Laravel was hiring for jobs. It wasn't DevRel, but I, kind of put in an application with the thought of, hey, here's what I can do. I would gladly do this on the side.
Yeah.
With this other job that I'm getting paid for. And Taylor eventually kind of said, hey, why don't you do half DevRel to start and half, customer support? And here we are now where I'm kind of all the way into DevRel now.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, man.
Yeah.
I gotta ask, what on earth is a sales engineer? I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is essentially a enterprise version of a DevRel. It was the closest thing I could find that got paid a decent amount of money without me, jumping to a beginner DevRel or like taking a salary cut at the time and kind of thing. And so it is basically, imagine a tech company that isn't necessarily focused for developers. Mm-hmm. Sales engineer would be, you're getting on a call with all these enterprise people and they are saying, hey, we need this tool to do X, Y, and Z. And so sales engineer, I would do.
Can you customize it that way?
Yep, exactly. Okay. Demos, I would say, hey, you can use our API for this. This is what that code would look like, X, Y, Z kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah,
almost like a technical salesperson.
Exactly. Technical salesperson for sure.
Got it. Cool. That's a really fun dream. I mean, I told you this when I first reached out and I was like, hey, you came out of nowhere. Let's be friends. Yeah. And I meant that because I love it when this happens where someone I've never heard of before starts putting out consistently good content. And I'm just like, I don't know who this is. I don't know where they came from, but I like their vibe. I like them teaching people. Let's be friends. And that's really what it felt like. It's just kind of like, there's this guy, Josh, he's making videos. And you told a little bit of your story at the time about like, hey, I got laid off and I'm going to do something. What am I going to venture with? I'm just going to start publishing the content. That's that's a story we love in the Laravel community for sure. But yeah, it's really cool to hear that. So today, your job, you mentioned a little bit about kind of like what you work on day to day. But like, have there been particular projects? So you mentioned working on the sales calculator. Have there been particular projects in the biz dev world, or is the in the DevRel world, or is the DevRel world mainly about creating content, creating videos? Like how big and structured is it, and how much is it like just do this thing? Hey, Chris will check in with you guys, make sure you're doing your thing right. But as long as you're doing your thing right, you just do it.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think the thing that I've really appreciated about being on the Laravel team is that, a lot of people think, hey, Laravel took all this funding. Now it's just this corporate entity and you have to go through all these checks and balances in order to, get something out the door kind of thing. And I think, there has to be some form of that is different. And Taylor's even talked about it on, this podcast and others where it's like, hey, things are different for him than it was a year ago. But at the same time, it still feels very Laravel-y. And for someone who, before I joined, I wanted to learn everything about Laravel as a company, Laravel as a open source thing, Laravel as, these products that I enjoyed. And so I did look and I was like, okay, it's cool that it seems like there's like 8 people, and I think there was less at the time, that are just building, 3 projects or 3 products, and they're pushing a release every week. And I was like, this is crazy. Like I have been on teams where I have literally written code and I'm like, hey, we should use this as a feature, and then it either gets trashed or it gets built in 2 years and then it's finally released and all this stuff. And so when I joined, I was, and I still am, surprised at how awesome it is that literally everyone is there with the same goal of, we just want to make Laravel and the products that we have better and our community better and all that thing. We just want to make it as good as we can. And, we're not going to be held back by possible questions or negative aspects that could hinder that kind of output. And so from when I first joined to now, not much has changed other than, Chris being able to be a great guiding force as to, hey, let's put more attention to this, or let's put less attention into this. But in terms of like the content wise, it's very much maybe myself or Christoph has an idea, and then it's like, hey, why don't we do that? a lot of this past year has been very centered on product releases. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the content that we had done last year is not as consistent, I would say, in a lot of ways, because this year has been more of, okay, Cloud's releasing, Nightwatch is releasing. What's some great content that people don't necessarily know about Cloud, or just even, here's how to use Nightwatch better. And so a lot of that has been what I would say is probably more marketing content, but it's not the sole focus, or won't be the sole focus forever. That's kind of just a time frame in a sense.
Got it. I know we have other topics we got to cover, but there's one thing I've been wanting to ask you for, I guess, years at this point, since you said 2023.
Yeah.
When you are creating videos on the internet, I have the sense that you have one of the least scripted kind of setups behind each video of anybody I see. And some people are just great extemporaneous speakers. That's certainly a thing. But I feel like a lot of people, it feels like even if they're not reading from a script, they knew what they were going to say pretty strongly ahead of time. And I've always kind of watched you and I'm like, I think Josh has an outline, and he's just kind of, the words that fit in between each point of the outline are just kind of what comes out of his head. And I was very curious. And so you're talking about improv, and I'm like, well, there you go. But I want to know, like, how intentionally are you using your improv skills? How intentionally are you leaning into the background that you have as the way you create videos, as the way you act as a DevRel?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because I think it's interesting that I think a lot of my background, from improv to music to even sales engineer stuff, has really led to my videos getting better. And I think the biggest thing, and what I would kind of encourage a lot of people to do, is like, if I looked at my first video, and you could probably look at it too, like my first video on my channel, or even the first video within the Laravel official channel to now, there's been improvement, at least in my mind. And I think a lot of that's just from consistency. Mm-hmm. But then the second aspect is, I think the sales engineering piece kind of gave me the tools of how can I formulate, especially when it comes to like the intro, or just you're thinking of an overall key theme of the video that you want to keep in mind throughout. But as you're talking, as in the intro of the video, you want to tell people, why do you care about this particular 20 minutes? Why do you care about this particular 8 minutes? And so usually I don't write much of anything for every single video. Usually the title or the topic is the only thing that I'm keeping in mind. And so if it's something like, if it's something like, what is, I'm taking an example from a video that I made on the Laravel official channel. That's, what is Livewire Volt? And so in my mind, a lot of it kind of goes into, okay, I'm on Twitter a lot, and I could say that's probably part of my job as well, but I'm on Twitter a lot. And so I'm seeing that people don't like Volt, but it's not because they don't like it being in one file. Usually it's like they don't like that it feels different than Livewire, or it feels like there's no tooling around it. And so all their tests don't work in this particular way. And so as I'm doing that video, as I'm doing that intro, I'm thinking about the people who might be watching, or the people who are consuming this. And so that improv piece probably comes in, as well as that sales engineering piece. And I think probably the musical piece of like, okay, as we're going through this, we want to keep on key, if you will. Like there's different rhythms that we could go throughout this video, but at the end of the day, every single piece of value that should be taken out of that video is, hey, this is not different from what you might be using if you are using Livewire. But if you haven't used Livewire, here's why it might be easier than traditional Livewire for you. Yeah. And so I think usually, to kind of answer your question in a roundabout way, I don't script anything. And it's more of, if you were to get a hand on a raw video file of mine that's recorded, you will see about 8 to 10 takes of the 2 to 5 minute intro. Yeah. 2 to 3 minutes sometimes. The middle, I hardly ever recut. Sometimes I stumble over my words and I start again. But there's very little taken out of the intro or the middle of the video that's more, I like to keep that more raw, less polished in a lot of ways, because that's just the meat and potatoes. And then the outro is probably 5 to 7 different takes. And that's usually just, how am I wrapping all this up with a bow in a lot of ways?
Yep. I mean, my Laracast videos and YouTube videos are exactly the same way. It's getting this intro, getting this outro, and then sitting back and just do the thing. So,
the rest is easy.
It's funny. This morning I was working with one of the Laracon speakers through their talk, and this particular speaker is a jazz musician, and we were kind of relating it because they are very experienced jazz musician and a relatively new speaker. And so I was kind of saying things, and I'm like, so we want to work on your pacing, and we want to work on your phrasing. We want to work on the tone being high here and low here, because if right now you're at like an 80 all the time, but we want to be an 80 sometimes, a 40 sometimes. And they're like, this jazz concept, that musical concept, and I expected it to be like I was like, I don't want to give you too much kind of notes because Laracon's in a couple weeks, and they're like, no, because it all perfectly slots into my musical understanding that I have. I totally get it. I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, we're telling stories, we're doing phrasing. You got the crescendo, the decrescendo, the rest makes the next thing, like the drop in a techno thing makes the next thing even bigger. It's just all that same stuff comes into play. So yeah, it's really fun kind of seeing the parallels with yours as well.
Yeah. And it's funny because that is a working talk title I've had. I haven't gotten the chance to give this at any conference. I still apply with it every now and then for some conferences, but if you were to take, especially in the Laravel world, outside the Laravel world, I think it's still a large majority of people, but the people who have some sort of musical background as developers there's a huge overlap there. And I have this kind of working talk called Music as Code, where like a lot of what we are like writing, or just like the process of development, and just like the process of like your creativity in general, kind of leads into why a lot of musicians or developers were musicians in a lot of ways. It's funny how many people had bands or still play nowadays too. It's an incredible kind of overlap in my mind in a lot of ways.
Yep. First being music, probably second being woodworking. So
that's
figure that out.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's an actual topic I'm supposed to cover. Each of these is supposed to be, I want to hear all about you, and then we don't talk about the actual topic. So the actual topic right now is, I have learned through the grapevine that you guys are working on the boot camp, and I don't know anything about this. And I keep telling you, I'm like, usually I have a decent idea what we're talking about, and I pretend like I don't, because that makes me a more curious guest or host.
Yeah.
I literally don't know. I know what the boot camp is. I know that I know what refresh boot camp means in theory, and that's as far as I've got. So I just got to leave it to you. Can you tell us about kind of what you've been working on lately?
Yeah. So this is something that I have kind of had on the back of my mind since I started, but it wasn't really until, until Chris came on and we kind of had this overall sense of, okay, what should be the main focus of stuff? Is it specifically just for YouTube content? Is it specifically for, within the community and open source and templates and projects and stuff like that? What should the overall goal of DevRel be, and where does that live in a lot of sense? And so I was always a fan, and still am a fan, of like the boot camp for Laravel that used to live at bootcamp.laravel.com. It's currently not live, mostly because we had this revamped version kind of in the pipeline, but also because it used Breeze instead of like the new starter kits. And so the process of updating it would have been the same as what we're working on now. Yeah. And so the thought in my mind is like, there should always be a starting point for people who are new to Laravel. Usually, and I think our documentation is fantastic. It's built that way. I think we've even in past year have improved things of how you install PHP and Composer and Laravel with a single command on the Laravel docs, which is great. But there's still that process of, okay, now if I want to, even if I'm familiar with web development or routing and requests and templating and all that, there's still a what if or where do I go next question for a lot of new to Laravel people, or just people who are Laravel curious. And so because this has been part of my journey where I didn't know MVC or I didn't know PHP at all, and I just kind of like learned as I went, the revamped bootcamp was something that was near and dear to my mind, and something that I've been working on, especially the past month, but really in the last couple of weeks. So we're basically relaunching the bootcamp as a getting started with Laravel, and we're going to still do an ode to the original Chirper application. And so it's still going to be built with Chirper. I think the only key differences that we would note is a lot of feedback that we got from people who had taken it, as well as people who we asked of, when you did the boot camp, what was the first things that came to mind is it's a lot. It's really hard, especially if you're getting started with Laravel, to know where to start when it comes to the first step of, okay, we have starter kits. If you know React, you know Vue, that's great. But there's still, okay, how does that fit in? Where does inertia come into play?
And you have like 300 files in there. Even when you get the file, you're like, which of the 300 files do I open? I don't know.
You're like, I think I know. And even, it was, I think the thing I really like about being a DevRel, and I think, all of us on the team, Christoph and Leah, like we all feel this way in a lot of senses. Like we watch streams of like when Taylor was on Primogen's stream with Tej, like these are two developers, both Tej and Prime. Tej, I had also worked in Laravel a little bit or done a personal project within it. But Prime is not a dumb developer. He's a very smart developer.
Yeah,
and so, incredibly smart guy. And so the fact that, and of course, like his brain's kind of all over the place too at the same time. But when stuff like that is also a hard struggle to say, okay, where would I go for this? I have an idea, and most of the time that guess is probably correct. But what is the absolute basics of what I need to know that then brings you into, okay, now let's enhance that with Livewire, or now let's add inertia with React and Vue. And I think the old bootcamp kind of forced you to, again, I love the old bootcamp. I think the old bootcamp forced you, because of Breeze, you kind of had to choose which one you were going to do before you even saw anything.
Do what you're doing. Yeah.
And that's tough. Especially when I don't think there should be a starter kit that is just Blade and then you add on to it in a lot of ways. Like Taylor's kind of talked about that as well. And so the boot camp, which is effectively the first part of a new initiative put on by the DevRel team called Laravel Learn, to be able to have these micro courses and a place for a lot of this more in-depth written content and in-depth videos to live, to kind of teach the basics of Laravel in that sense. It's not meant to replace Laracast. It's not meant to replace our YouTube channel, but it is meant to be okay, if I'm browsing Laravel's site, what is the first thing I need to get up and running? And so this new bootcamp is just Blade. It's mostly like, what is a web request? How do we do a route? How do we do a form? And while not all of that is probably transferable into inertia and Livewire and things like that, I think it sets the groundwork for most people to feel why Laravel is so powerful, because it gives, even within forms and, like HTML requests and controllers, you still get the feeling of, oh, this has everything, even if we don't touch events just yet, or even if we don't touch notifications and that kind of thing.
That's nice. Did you guys, did you end up having to build like an education platform to be able to deliver this? Is it just videos, or what's the situation like?
Yeah, and it's still very much a work in progress. So like the details might change in that sense as well, but it is very much kind of like a micro education platform, I guess you could say, where the goal is definitely, there's two types of learners usually, text-based and video-based. And so that was one of the things that the DevRel team and Chris leading that kind of said, hey, we don't want this to just be videos. You can go to YouTube to do that. So we want this to be that SEO kind of evergreen content of, so all the content that I have been creating has started by text to say, this is how this bootcamp would look. And they're meant to be bite-sized snippets where each video, each even written course can be completed within 5 to 7 minutes. Nice. And each course is probably 8 to 10 lessons in that sense too. So the goal is to make it as consumable as possible while also being easily digestible too. So yeah, it is a micro learning platform in a lot of ways. But at least to start, probably more of just like, hey, here's the blog, kind of like old bootcamp style where it was just all written content. But then here's a video to go along with it too, depending on your learning style.
That's very cool. As you have been building out the bootcamp, obviously you've been able to bring your own experience as somebody who came to Laravel relatively recently. Is there anything where another member of the team, the DevRel team, brought an insight that you didn't have aspect to? Because maybe because you were a JavaScript programmer, right? So there was things there you're like, oh, that's just obvious. Or is there any aspect where you've been like, oh, that's not something I would have expected, or anything you've learned along the way?
Yeah, I think for me specifically, and I think like this is also like a great point of, having to, like you said, kind of take those extra things. And even if I might not agree on my personal opinions on that, like it's having that overall sense of, okay, well, what is the majority best good for the community and good for new learners as well? Because I personally probably wouldn't start with Blade in the sense that I don't like controllers. That's just something that's never worked with my brain. Mm-hmm. But I also know that if I'm writing inertia, I have to use controllers. And so it's this kind of like this give and take of, if we are going to teach new people who are into Laravel, before they even touch the awesome magic of inertia, like you almost have to start, and this is probably like my own preference too. Like I like starting with like the front end and then moving into the back end. And so with this starter kit, with this, welcome to the bootcamp, learning Laravel bootcamp. We want to focus on, here's what Laravel provides. Now you can go and do with it. Build out your front end. Now you can go and build out these notifications. And so the goal of it, as a whole, like this initial bootcamp piece is meant to be that starting point of getting started and seeing the magic of Laravel. But the goal of it is also to try to be modular as well, where maybe it's, and a lot of this is kind of hypothetical, but maybe it's down the line of, okay, well now you built that. How do you add inertia on top of that? Or how do you add Livewire? Where do those pieces fall? Or what even is PHP in a lot of sense? Like what do you need to know if you've never touched PHP? What are some things that you need to know even before you get started with Laravel?
Yeah. Did you know that PHP is no longer named personal homepage?
I did not know that. No.
It was originally in the 90s when he created it called personal homepage, and they renamed it at some point, and it's now, and I'm trying to remember what it is, but it's a name that has its own name in it. There's a phrase for that. So it is now
is a
PHP hypertext processor.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm like, so PHP is in the name of PHP, and they're like, yeah, that's a thing. It's got a name. So anyway, you said what's PHP? Yeah, it is. PHP is. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I think Chris and Christoph specifically helped lean into that too, of like the sense of, okay, here's, Chris also had people who, he was teaching Laravel, especially at his time in DigitalOcean, people who were just coming into Laravel. And so there was the sense of, okay, when you guys start with bootcamp, what didn't make sense or what was frustrating? What was great about it? And so being able to take so many people's like personal opinions, but then also like just the things that they've heard has been great to kind of combine this into, okay, this might not be perfect, but it gives us the starting point that allows us to branch out from there.
Yeah, that's very cool. I actually need to start rapping, which I told you at the beginning. I was like, oh, we're going to be really short. I'm so dumb because you and I together could talk for hours every time we're in a call. I'm like, oh yeah, we've got to cut for time. But is there anything else about the boot camp that you wanted to share that you had a chance to get to?
Yeah, I think not too much. I think like the overall goal is like this boot camp is just one part of what we want to eventually become Laravel Learn, so that there is multiple versions of this boot camp in a way. So it is meant to be text-based and video-based at the same time, but we will also probably release those on YouTube as like full length, all of them kind of put together. And it's great to be able to get inspiration and also just look at folks like Laracasts who are doing a lot of that kind of similar stuff. And again, it's not meant to compete with that. It's more of like, hey, how can we teach this particular aspect, and then how can you teach that particular aspect in a different way?
I love it. Are there any other things that you and the DevRel team are working on right now that you think some people who listen might not be aware of? Whether it's something you're excited that you're talking about in the future, or whether it's something you've been doing but maybe just not everybody knows about it.
Yeah, I think the biggest one is maybe not many people know about. They probably do, especially if they're listening to this podcast. But I think Night Watch is definitely one that was one of the most biggest recent pushes of the DevRel team, not just for the marketing site, which Leah kind of headed up as well, but then also just a lot of content around that, whether that's live streams or things like that. Another thing to kind of keep in mind is we are also, you can kind of see past versions. We've done it 2 times now, but we're trying out these kind of open office hours within live streams for the Laravel as well. And then, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay. Well, I had one other really important question for you, which is, I heard a story about some guy in a park paying you $200 to slap him, and I got to hear the story. So what's going on there?
Yeah, it's a wild story. I was in college. I think I was just out of college at the time. So this was when I was kind of trying to make my dues within Second City and everything like that. And this, there's a Millennium Park in Chicago, which is kind of like the biggest park. There's, if you've ever seen the Bean, which is like the big metal bean that lives in the center of Millennium Park. But yeah, it's a lot of people hang out, and in the summer, it's a really nice area. And so this guy came up to me, and he was kind of frantic at first, and he said, like, "Hey, like, I'll give you $200. You slap me on the face, like right here, as hard as you can." And I thought it was like either YouTuber, joke, prank, like, that kind of thing, or I don't know. My mind first went to undercover cop, like,
you're like, am I getting arrested?
Yeah, like I can't do this. But he ended up showing me these papers of how he was going to court, and like he was telling me like this whole backstory of how his significant other was, physically abusing him and all this thing. But he's like, I don't have any evidence. And so like, if you do this, then like I could, I could be like the part of this. I'm not proud of it, but
it's like, I'm not saying I turned down $200 though.
I'm not saying I turned down $200, but I'm not like, I don't think it's my moral, like,
highest moment.
who can tell if he was telling the truth or lying, or maybe he didn't even have court. Maybe that was just,
maybe he just really likes getting slapped in the face. That's worth $200 for him,
Exactly. So I'm not going to turn it down. And so I asked the questions just to make sure I wasn't, going to be held legally responsible for anything, whether he was a cop or anything else. But yeah, that was surprisingly one of the first times, and I think only times, that someone has asked me to hit them for money.
Yeah. More money is really, because like, ask them to hit them, like, that's happened occasionally, but never for money.
And the funny thing was, he said he had asked like 4 other people, and everyone said no. So I was like, well, I can't leave you hanging. Like,
further, you're like, he's gonna get slapped somehow, right? So it might as well be me. So
yeah, I was like, I'm not gonna do it too hard. I actually had to do it twice because the first time he said it wasn't hard enough. Yeah. So
did anybody stop and like stare at you after the first time?
He had made like a pretty big scene, so like it was more people like cheering me on. So this was like classic Chicago at this point, where like, yeah, do it, dude. Like, there's just people I don't even know. Like I was not there. I was there by myself.
So funny. All right, last thing. I thought that was the last one until you said classic Chicago. Malort. Have you had the opportunity to experience Malort in your life?
I have. Yes.
Okay. If a listener who has not lived in Chicago, because I've been in Chicago for years, but not for. Yep. I lived in Chicago for like 3 or 4 or 5 years. Not a lifetime Chicagoan, but long enough to experience Malort. If somebody has never had their time in Chicago, has never gotten to experience Malort, how would you describe that drink of drinks?
I would describe it as. I'm trying to think of like a good analogy. I would describe it as the very first time. This is not described taste. This is more like a sensation. The very first time, the very first time that maybe you grabbed a lemon and you sucked it.
I was going to say the same thing.
And initially you're like, oh, that was way too strong, or like, I don't think I'll ever do it again. But then like the after feeling is like, oh, that was rather enjoyable. I'll never experience that again. That is Malort.
I don't think we need to do anything. I think the podcast is done. I think we're good. And look at that.
Call
it's 44 minutes and 52 seconds. We're good to go. Is there anything else you wish we'd covered in this podcast that we didn't get to today?
I don't think so. Yeah, keep checking the Laravel official YouTube channel and the Laravel Twitter account. That's probably the best way to kind of keep up to date with everything that we're doing as a DevRel team. But yeah, overall, I'm super excited with just being on the Laravel team, being on this podcast, and for what is coming up in the future, not just for DevRel, but all of Laravel.
I love it. Well, thank you for who you are and for what you contribute to our community and the way you're teaching everybody and all the stuff you're sharing. And thank you for hanging out with us today.
Thank you.
All right. For the rest of you, we'll see you all next time.